Have you ever watched someone's entire demeanor shift the moment you mentioned wanting to spend more time together? Like watching Blair Waldorf from Gossip Girl suddenly lose her composure when someone gets too close to discovering her deepest vulnerabilities. That sudden panic, that desperate need to create distance. This is exactly why avoidants feel panic when you get too close, and understanding this reaction might just save your most important relationships. The human mind operates much like a sophisticated alarm system, constantly scanning for threats to our emotional well-being. For those with avoidant attachment styles, intimacy registers not as comfort, but as danger. Think of it as an emotional burglar alarm that goes off every time someone tries to peek behind the carefully constructed walls they've built around their hearts. What makes this particularly fascinating is how this response often catches everyone off guard, including the avoidant person themselves. Picture this scenario. Everything seems to be going perfectly in a relationship. There's laughter, connection, shared experiences. Then suddenly, like a switch being flipped, the avoidant partner becomes distant, critical, or even cruel. They might start picking fights about trivial matters, or worse, they might simply disappear emotionally while remaining physically present. This isn't malicious behavior. It's a deeply ingrained survival mechanism that operates below the level of conscious thought. The psychology behind this reaction involves what researchers call the intimacy-avoidance cycle. When emotional closeness reaches a certain threshold, the avoidant person's nervous system essentially declares a state of emergency. Their brain interprets love and connection as potential sources of pain, rejection, or loss of independence. It's as if their internal warning system shouts, "Danger ahead! Deploy defensive measures immediately." But here's where it gets particularly complex. This same person desperately wants connection, creating an internal war between their deepest needs and their strongest fears. Understanding this pattern requires examining how early experiences shape our adult relationships. Children who learned that emotional needs were burdensome, that love came with conditions, or that caregivers were unpredictable, often develop strategies to protect themselves from future disappointment. They become masters of self-reliance, convincing themselves that needing others is weakness and that true safety lies in emotional independence. These strategies work brilliantly for survival, but they create havoc in adult romantic relationships where vulnerability and interdependence are essential ingredients for lasting intimacy. What's particularly cruel about this dynamic is how it punishes the very thing the avoidant person secretly craves most. The closer someone gets to their authentic self, the more terrified they become of eventual abandonment or engulfment. It's like being desperately thirsty but afraid that drinking water might be poisonous. The cognitive bias at play here is called negativity bias, the tendency to give more weight to negative possibilities than positive ones. For avoidants, this bias is amplified when it comes to relationships, causing them to focus intensely on what could go wrong rather than what's going right. If you want to better understand someone's attachment style, see the link in the description to one of the most popular books on attachment theory. Now, let me tell you about Marcus, a brilliant architect who seemed to have everything figured out. He lived in a perfectly organized apartment with clean lines and minimal decoration, everything in its place, just like his emotions. Marcus had been dating Sarah for 6 months, and things were progressing beautifully. They shared inside jokes, weekend adventures, and long conversations that stretched deep into the night. Sarah felt like she was getting to know the real Marcus, the one behind his professional facade and careful composure. But as their relationship deepened, something peculiar began to happen. The more Sarah expressed her feelings, the more distant Marcus became. When she suggested meeting his family, he suddenly had urgent work projects. When she left a toothbrush at his place, he became irritable about clutter. When she said she loved him, he responded with, "That's nice," and immediately changed the subject to something safer, like the weather or weekend plans. Sarah couldn't understand what was happening. Just weeks before, Marcus had been the one initiating deeper conversations and making future plans. Now, he seemed to be systematically dismantling the intimacy they'd built together. She began to question everything. Was she too needy? Had she misread his signals? Was she pushing too hard too fast? The confusion was maddening because Marcus still showed up, still spent time with her, but the emotional connection felt like it was slipping through her fingers like sand. What Sarah didn't realize was that Marcus was experiencing something akin to emotional claustrophobia. Every expression of her love felt like walls closing in around him. His chest would tighten when she talked about their future together. His mind would race with thoughts of escape when she looked at him with obvious affection. It wasn't that he didn't care about her, quite the opposite. He cared so much that the possibility of losing her, or of disappointing her, or of being consumed by the relationship felt overwhelming. The turning point came during a seemingly innocent conversation about vacation plans. Sarah mentioned wanting to travel to Paris together, painting a picture of romantic walks along the Seine and cozy dinners in small cafes. As she spoke, her eyes bright with excitement and possibility, Marcus felt something inside him snap. Without warning, he found himself saying cruel things, that she was clingy, that he needed space, that maybe they weren't compatible after all. The words came out like weapons designed to create the distance his nervous system was desperately demanding. Sarah left that night in tears, completely blindsided by his sudden coldness. Marcus sat alone in his pristine apartment, simultaneously relieved by the space and devastated by what he'd done. He couldn't explain to himself why he'd sabotaged something good, why he'd hurt someone who only wanted to love him. This is the tragic paradox of avoidant attachment. The strategies that once provided safety now create the very abandonment they're designed to prevent. But this story isn't over yet, and what happened next reveals something crucial about the possibility for healing and growth. 3 days later, Marcus found himself staring at his phone, wanting to call Sarah but paralyzed by shame and confusion. He'd been here before, in this space where he'd pushed someone away and then felt the hollow ache of loneliness. The pattern was as familiar as his morning coffee routine, yet he felt powerless to change it. Meanwhile, Sarah was doing her own soul-searching, trying to understand what had gone so wrong so quickly. She remembered how Joe Goldberg from the Netflix series You would obsessively analyze every interaction with his romantic interests, and she found herself falling into a similar pattern of overthinking and self-blame. The resolution came when Marcus finally recognized his pattern and made a choice that went against every instinct screaming in his head. He called Sarah, not to apologize with empty words, but to share something he'd never shared with anyone. The story of his childhood, where love came with conditions and emotional needs were met with irritation or dismissal. For the first time, he didn't try to manage her reaction or control the outcome. He simply offered his truth and waited to see what she would do with it. If you find yourself loving someone who seems to panic when you get close, the first thing to understand is that their reaction has very little to do with you and everything to do with their learned survival strategies. Think of it like someone who flinches when you raise your hand to wave. They're not responding to your friendly gesture, but to past experiences where raised hands meant something entirely different. Your job isn't to fix them or convince them they're safe. Your job is to decide whether you can love them while they do their own work of healing. Start by recognizing the signs of avoidant panic before it escalates into relationship-damaging behavior. Watch for subtle shifts in communication patterns. Perhaps they become more formal in their texts, or they start deflecting emotional conversations with humor or logic. Notice if they suddenly become hypercritical of small things, like how you load the dishwasher or organize your schedule. These behaviors aren't really about dishes or schedules, they're about creating emotional distance when intimacy feels too threatening. When you spot these early warning signs, resist the urge to pursue harder or demand explanations. Instead, maintain your own emotional equilibrium and give them space to process without withdrawing your warmth entirely. Communication with someone experiencing avoidant panic requires the delicacy of a skilled diplomat. Avoid phrases that might feel like pressure or demands, such as, "We need to talk," or "Where is this relationship going?" Instead, try gentle observations without judgment. "I noticed you seem a bit distant lately, and I want you to know there's no pressure to share anything you're not ready for." This approach acknowledges their emotional state without making them feel cornered or analyzed. Remember that avoidants often feel like they're under a microscope in relationships, with their every mood and behavior subject to interpretation and discussion. But here's something crucial that many people miss. You cannot love someone out of their avoidant patterns through sheer persistence or perfect behavior. Think of Emily Cooper from Emily in Paris, who often believes that her enthusiasm and dedication can overcome any obstacle or win over any difficult person. While admirable, this approach often backfires with avoidant partners because it can feel overwhelming and increase their sense of being pursued or pressured. The most powerful thing you can do is maintain your own emotional stability and clear boundaries while offering consistent, non-demanding presence. Set realistic expectations for progress and healing. Avoidant attachment patterns typically took years to develop, often beginning in early childhood, so they won't disappear after a few honest conversations or therapy sessions. Expect setbacks, moments of progress followed by retreats, and periods where it feels like you're starting over. This doesn't mean the relationship is doomed. It means you're dealing with deeply ingrained nervous system responses that require patience and understanding to rewire. Document the small victories, moments when they share a feeling without being asked, times when they don't withdraw after conflict, instances when they choose connection over self-protection. Create what therapists call earned security by being predictably safe in your responses. This means not punishing them for sharing vulnerable thoughts, not using their fears against them during arguments, and not threatening abandonment when they struggle with intimacy. Consistency is everything here. Avoidants need to learn through repeated experience that emotional openness doesn't lead to rejection, criticism, or engulfment. Your responses during their vulnerable moments become the new data their nervous system uses to assess whether intimacy is safe or dangerous. However, and this is critically important, maintaining your own emotional well-being must remain the top priority. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and you cannot provide security for someone else if you're constantly walking on eggshells or sacrificing your own needs for connection. Set clear boundaries about behaviors you will and won't tolerate. It's perfectly reasonable to say something like, "I understand that intimacy feels scary for you, and I want to support your growth, but I won't accept being treated cruelly or having my feelings dismissed when you're struggling." Encourage professional support without making it an ultimatum. Many avoidants benefit enormously from therapy, particularly approaches like EMDR or somatic therapy that help process the body-based trauma responses underlying their attachment patterns. You might say, "I've noticed you seem to struggle with some of these relationship patterns, and I wonder if talking to someone might help you understand them better." Frame therapy as a tool for their own growth and self-understanding rather than something they need to do to save the relationship. Practice what psychologists call differentiation, maintaining your sense of self, even when your partner is struggling with their attachment insecurities. This means continuing to express your feelings authentically, even if they don't respond the way you'd like. It means making plans and pursuing interests that don't revolve around the relationship. It means staying connected to friends and family who remind you of your worth outside of this romantic partnership. Ironically, this independence often helps avoidant partners feel less trapped and more able to choose connection freely. Finally, learn to recognize your own cognitive biases that might be interfering with your ability to respond effectively. Many people in relationships with avoidance develop what's called anxious pursuit. The more their partner withdraws, the more they chase, explain, or try to fix things. This creates exactly the kind of pressure that activates avoidant panic responses. Break this cycle by developing your own tolerance for uncertainty and emotional discomfort. Not every withdrawal means the relationship is ending, and not every moment of distance requires immediate resolution or discussion. Understanding why avoidants feel panic when you get too close isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's a pathway to deeper compassion, both for them and for yourself. Like Chuck Bass from Gossip Girl, who spent seasons running from love because it felt too vulnerable and dangerous. Many avoidants are fighting battles with their own capacity for intimacy that have nothing to do with your worthiness of love. The panic they feel isn't a reflection of your value or the relationship's potential. It's evidence of old wounds that haven't yet healed and nervous system responses that haven't yet learned to associate closeness with safety. The journey of loving someone with avoidant attachment will test your patience, challenge your assumptions about love, and require you to develop emotional muscles you might not even know you had. There will be moments when their panic creates chaos in your life, when their withdrawal feels like rejection, when their patterns trigger your own deepest insecurities about being wanted and valued. These moments are not failures. They're opportunities to practice the kind of love that holds steady even when everything feels uncertain. But here's what makes this journey worthwhile. When an avoidant person slowly learns to stay present during intimate moments, when they choose vulnerability over self-protection, when they risk their heart despite every instinct telling them to run, these moments carry a profound beauty precisely because of how much courage they required. You get to witness someone literally rewiring their nervous system for love, choosing connection despite years of conditioning that told them it wasn't safe. The work isn't just theirs to do, though. Your own growth will be equally important. Learning to find security within yourself rather than seeking it from their responses. Developing the wisdom to know when to step forward and when to step back. Cultivating the strength to love someone fully while holding your expectations lightly. This is advanced-level relationship territory, requiring emotional intelligence, patience, and a deep commitment to seeing beyond surface behaviors to the wounded but hopeful heart underneath. Remember that healing attachment wounds is possible, but it requires willingness from both people to examine their patterns, challenge their assumptions, and slowly build new neural pathways for intimacy. The panic that feels so overwhelming and relationship-threatening today can become the very thing that motivates deeper healing and ultimately creates a love that's stronger precisely because it was hard-won. Every small moment of choosing connection over self-protection becomes a building block for lasting intimacy. Take action on what you've learned here. If you recognize these patterns in your relationship, start implementing the strategies we've discussed, maintaining your own emotional stability, communicating with patience and understanding, setting healthy boundaries while offering consistent safety. Most importantly, remember that you deserve a love that doesn't require you to make yourself smaller or constantly prove your worth. The right person will do their own healing work not because you demand it, but because they recognize that you're worth fighting their demons for. Your love story is still being written, and understanding these patterns is just the beginning of creating the deep, lasting connection your heart truly desires.
Thank you for watching. If you want to learn how to better understand avoidance, relationships, and psychological biases, then subscribe to our channel, because you deserve beautiful relationships.